I'm Roy Lee Lindsay with the North Carolina Pork Council, and I want everyone to remember, bacon makes everything better.
Welcome back for another edition of Wild Dogs and Hogs. I'm Mike Waddell. He's the coach, Jim Collins, and what a week of college football in number 13 of the 2022 autumn. You have North Carolina State. Duke loses their head coach. Wake Forest closes out a disappointing season, and Appalachian State wins their fifth game in a row, and the Mountaineers are off to Troy this week for the Sun Belt Championship game. It never ceases to amaze the drama and the twists and turns of college football.
You know, the interesting thing, Mike, is that when the month of November started, what was our theme of every discussion we had on these shows? You remember November. App State had a November to remember. North Carolina had a November to forget. North Carolina State had a November to remember. So it goes without saying, if you close strong, then you've got a chance to be in a championship game and be in a great bowl game. So, hey, that's the theme of it. Remember November.
The Monday after the regular season usually is just littered with news stories, and that did not disappoint here today. Coachings, comings, and goings, more specifically, the second ACC opening. Last week, we talked about Dino Babers in Syracuse. Today, we're talking about Mike Elko and Duke, the second-year head coach for the Blue Devils, flying off to College Station from whence he came 2 years ago. Not really a surprise, but what a run for Coach Elko at Duke.
There's been two coaches in the history, as far as I can remember, that have moved on to other head coaching jobs from the head coaching job at Duke. Number one was Steve Spurrier, who left Duke to go to University of Florida, which I was fortunate to be on that ride. And then, of course, Mike Elko to Texas A&M. Everything fell into place for Coach Elko, without a doubt. He did a great job. He came in and they gave him the opportunity to recruit some good players and to use the transfer portal and the things that you need to do to win in today's college football. And Mike did that. Unfortunately, his quarterback got hurt, and this year was not quite as good as it could have been, probably, if the quarterback doesn't get hurt. But he is now the head coach at Texas A&M University, and he's got about 7 million reasons per year to be quite happy to be going to Texas A&M.
When you look at coaches leaving right at the end of the season, but before the bowl game, Trooper Taylor, he's going to be the interim head coach for Duke in their bowl game, which will be announced next weekend. But for those kids, they've now gone through David Cutcliffe leaving, and now Mike Elko leaving. It's going to be very hard to keep that roster together, especially, I would think, if Riley Leonard is able to come back off of his season-ending surgery and get back to 100%. If that's his prognosis, it's hard to believe that he's going to stick around in Durham for another season in 2024.
Well, it'll be interesting that, as we all know, and all the fans out there know, the transfer portal opens next week. So hiring a head football coach right now is extremely critical as it's ever been in this business. We used to fight a February signing date for high school players. Now we fight a December signing date for high school players, plus the battle of the transfer portal. And you fight it two ways when you talk about the portal. The number one way that you fight it is losing your own players into the portal. And if I'm not mistaken, one of the really good Duke defensive linemen has already gone into the portal or said he will enter into the portal. And then you have to see what's out there that you can collect and build your roster out of the portal that's available to you. So critical time for Lisa King and the administration at Duke University.
One of the things that I really want to delve in with you, Jimmy, is your experience in coaching transitions, because Mike Elko, I've been reading things all throughout the first part of this week, ever since his name resurfaced in the Texas A&M search. And then after he took the job and flew overnight Sunday to land early Monday in College Station, Texas, he's been taking a lot of heat from people for not sticking around to talk in person with his Duke Blue Devil team.
Well, let me say this, Mike. I agree with you. I think this situation that he's in, what is he going to say to these guys? Hey, I had the opportunity to take the Texas A&M job. I'm going to make X millions of dollars more than I was making at Duke. There's going to be 100,000 people every time we tee it up at Texas A&M. We're at the highest level of college football. Hey, I'm sorry. What else are you going to say? And those kids at Duke, I feel for them. I've been there. I've coached at Duke for many, many years, and they deserve better. But whatever Coach Elko was going to say to them is not going to put any healing on the wounds that they feel for that guy leaving. So, to be honest with you, he's better off just going on and not doing a Zoom. I think I read somewhere where there was a Zoom meeting or whatever. But there's nothing you can say. Hey, I've decided to take another job.
For the second time in 2 years, Nina King and her leadership team over at Duke will be in the search mode. They've retained Parker executive search, and it ought to be a quick one. As Jimmy said, signing day coming up December 20th, and then again, the second signing day, the first week in February. When we come back here on Wild Dogs and Hogs, we'll turn the page to our second quarter, and we'll talk about the North Carolina Tar Heels and NC State Wolfpack. It was a game on Saturday night. Depends on who you're cheering for, if you thought it was a great game or one of the worst games of the season. We'll talk about that. The Heels and the Pack coming up next right here on Wild Dogs and Hogs.
Hey folks, David Glenn here. I cannot offer a greater endorsement or a bigger compliment than telling you about the folks that I use for important matters in my own life. That's the case with the Lawson Insurance Group, led by three actual brothers, Ken Lawson, Miller Lawson, and Michael Lawson. These guys operate a very successful family-oriented business right here in Raleigh, and that office happens to be one of those beautiful blends of NC State grads and UNC grads and graduates, fans and supporters of other colleges and universities all over North Carolina. I know these guys, I trust these guys, and I send these guys my own insurance business and that of my family. The next time you have insurance needs, I hope you'll do the same. The Lawson Insurance Group is known for its commitment to community and its dedication to ensuring that North Carolinians and their businesses are prepared for life's inevitable challenges, with the reminder that as a high street insurance partner, Lawson Insurance Group offers local expertise and support that, combined with High Street's extensive national resources, means more choice and support for you as their client. As we speak, Miller Lawson's helping the Glenn family with our auto insurance needs, and Ken Lawson is the guy to call for your commercial insurance needs. If you Google High Street Lawson Insurance, their website will be the first to pop up.
In our first quarter, we talked about the Duke Blue Devils and head coach Mike Elko taking flight to Texas A&M. Now in our second quarter, we'll talk about the big game on Saturday night over at Carter Finley Stadium, 39-20, Jimmy. North Carolina State with their third consecutive win over North Carolina. And I got to tell you, I think you and I both saw this one coming, but I really didn't fathom in my wildest mind that the same listless North Carolina team that came out for the throwaway game against Campbell back in the first week of November would reappear a week after playing Clemson, a tight game in Death Valley. But North Carolina, from the very outset of coming out for warm-ups, when I was on the field at Carter Finley Stadium, they weren't just flat, they were DOA. And as soon as the pad started to pop, you knew that North Carolina State was the team that really came to play. It's cliche, we can say it all the time, but the culture that Dave Doeren has built at North Carolina State, now their all-time winningest coach, is a superior culture, at least on the field over the last 3 years, to what Mack Brown has in his second stint in Chapel Hill.
Well, I thought it was interesting in Coach Doran's press conference after the game that, and I don't remember the exact number, but he said it's been 1,400 plus days since the Tar Heels have beaten the Wolfpack. So, and I have to admit, I've been part of two of those losses, and the two that I was a part of were close games that we lost at the end and had the opportunity to win. But I can honestly say that at any point in this game that this one was not close. You have to give the Wolfpack credit. They had their team prepared, both offensively and defensively. Brennan Armstrong was outstanding, 330 yards plus passing. They rushed for around 170 yards, 500 plus yards of offense, 39 points. Great job by the Wolfpack, without a doubt.
Drake May in the game, 22 of 38 passing for 254 yards, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He also ran the ball 9 times for 106 yards and a score. Not bad numbers, not Drake May numbers, not the type of numbers that we expected Drake May to put up in his 3rd year of college football, 2nd year as the Tar Heels starter. Does his performance over the latter part of this 2023 season give you pause that he may come back and play another year in Chapel Hill? Will he seek another place in college football via the portal? Or do you think he is going to say, hey, it's been fun, guys, but I'm going to get paid to develop in the National Football League?
Well, I'm gonna attack this in a little different way. Knowing the May family, I don't think there's any chance that he would leave and play at another university other than the University of North Carolina. There's just too much history and too much tradition among that family to do that. I will say he has a tough decision to make whether he will decide to go into the draft or decide to stay at the University of North Carolina. There have been people in the media that have criticized his performance and have made the statements that he has hurt his draft status. He hasn't hurt his draft status, not one bit. He'll still be the 1st or 2nd quarterback drafted if he decides to do that. And obviously I have no idea what he's going to do, but he is extremely talented. He has arm talent, he has leg talent, and by leg talent, I mean he has speed to run. He can move in the pocket. He's creative. He's smart, and he's a great personable guy. He would be a wonderful person to represent your franchise. Whether that's what he decides he wants to do, who knows at this point in time. But the people out there that say that he's hurt his draft status, they're wrong. He will be absolutely fine if that's what he decides to do.
And there's no guarantee that he's going to play in front of a better or behind a better offensive line where he may be drafted than he did at North Carolina. But this group continually, and I'd say the same thing about the defensive front as the offensive front. For North Carolina, it begins and ends in the trenches, and that group really did very little all season long. And if anything, you look at what Omarion Hampton has done on the ground with over 1,400 yards and saying that has to be, if there was a Nobel Prize for college football, it ought to go to Omarion Hampton for finding 1,400 yards behind that group of Weebles, because that group has just not been good. I went back and watched the game on Monday, and it was not a very high grade for that group.
Well, I'll tell you what, Omarion, with the short time that I was at North Carolina with Omarion, he just had so much talent. And I've been fortunate in this long career to be around some really, really fine running backs. And he has a chance to be one of those guys. He has a chance down the road in his career to play this game for a long time. And that's, to be honest with you, we had a guy by the name of Fred Taylor at the University of Florida many, many years ago, who ended up playing about 13 years in the NFL. And don't get me wrong, we had some good offensive linemen at Florida, but we didn't always block everybody, Mike. But you know what? Those really, really, really good ones, they managed to make yards whether you block anybody or not. And that's what Omarion has done. He's had the ability to break tackles and squirt through holes. And you go back and you look at the two great backs that Carolina had a couple of years ago that are both playing in the NFL, and Michael Carter and the Williams kid. They led the country in broken tackles and yards after contact. So I think Omarion Hampton is just an outstanding player.
Both North Carolina and Duke, along with NC State and Appalachian State, are getting ready to go to bowl games. For Appalachian State, tremendous regrouping over the course of the year. We'll talk about them a little bit later in the show. For North Carolina State, after that open day, you got to look for the New York Times bestseller, How to Structure an Open Date When Your Team is Stinking Up the Joint by Dave Dorrit, because the Wolfpack came back like gangbusters with this win streak. But then you have to turn around and think they're not going to be playing in a big New Year's Day bowl game, or it doesn't look like it right now. Peyton Wilson, we know he's a warrior. We know he's one of the all-time great NC State defensive players, if not overall players. Does he opt out? Does Omarion Hampton opt out? Does Drake May opt out? Do the power players say, if we're not playing in that playoff, the bowl game is not worth the risk for me?
Well, Mike, I have a real issue with opt-outs, and obviously that's from a coaching standpoint. And you've made a commitment, and there's and I'm gonna use an old statement right now. There's no I when you spell team, and you're part of a team. You know, whether you're Omarion Hampton or whomever you are, you've gained 1,400 yards. I don't care if there's 3 missed blocks on every play. Somebody got blocked, and it takes all 11 on offense and all 11 on defense to be good and to be successful. So I don't believe in opt-outs. The last time I checked, Mike, and you can correct me because you've been an administrator at a very high level in college football. The last time I checked, statistics from bowl games now count toward your career. So they also count towards your win-loss record. So does that mean the game does not matter? Well, anytime, in my opinion, in my humble opinion, anytime you line up to play against another opponent, I don't care where the game is played, I don't care if it's in Shreveport or Miami, then you're playing to win the game. And you're playing for your teammates. And I'm old school, and I'm sorry if I'm old school, but you will never convince me otherwise that it's the responsibility of the player to represent the team and to represent his teammates. That's just my opinion.
I don't disagree with you. I'll offer this as a devil's advocate point. Mike Elko just opted out of the bowl game for Duke. He made a commitment to over 120 guys and staff and things like that he would be there to leave. But we understand it's an economic model. I'm looking at the injuries that we have seen, catastrophic injuries in the Ohio State-Michigan game, in the Florida State game a few weeks ago. Guys that are now going to be on the shelf for 9 to 12 months with these catastrophic injuries. And when I look at these guys who have this much money to go, look, if you're not an elite level player and you opt out, you're missing the opportunity to prove that you're an elite level player. But if you're a Peyton Wilson, Cedric Gray, hard hitting defenders, who's to say that some guy can't come over there and take a cheap shot? And if you don't play that game, you take yourself out of the line of fire. You can still get injured in OTAs or in the draft camps or things like that. I think it's a tough thing. And I know I probably agree with you 99%, but if it was my kid, man, I don't know. I mean, I'd want to at least have somebody, and I think this is something that could help the opt-outs. If the NCAA would allow the schools, collectives, whatever, to heck with the collectives, the schools ought to do this. If you're going to play in those games, I want to see some type of an insurance policy for that game, a one-game insurance policy to put my mind at ease, because it might not be the total of an NFL contract, but it might be the total of 1 year of a rookie minimum that will at least get you to go out and really deliver it all. I just feel bad for the kids. Let's pause right now, go back to our third quarter, but I want to come back and talk about bowl games. I want to continue this discussion. You good for that?
No, I'm great. That works for me.
Let's do that. That's Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell. This is Wild Dogs and Hogs. We're talking college football here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
In sports, we talk a lot about impact players who make a positive difference. When it comes to our state's economy, the North Carolina pork industry is a true MVP. Each year, the pork industry plays an important role in supporting rural communities across our state. It contributes more than $10 billion a year to the North Carolina economy and supports more than 44,000 jobs. Learn more about their positive impact at ncpork.org. The North Carolina Pork Council, the foundational partner of the North Carolina Sports Network.
We're through the first half of Wild Dogs and Hogs here in week 14 of the college football season. I am Mike Waddell along with Coach Jim Collins, and we're going to continue our second quarter discussion, moving over to the third quarter and talk about bowl games. Now, Jimmy, this is the last year of the college football playoff only having 4 teams. It expands next year. When it expands next year, the bowl games will take a different meaning. And I've had a lot of conversations with people. We've talked about it. What do bowl games mean anymore? When I was growing up back in the 1970s, man, I couldn't wait to get my Charlotte Observer and see where they had North Carolina pegged to go, or where the Wolfpack might go, or any school that I was following at the time. It was a big deal because there were only like 20 bowl games. Now you don't even have to have a winning record to go to a bowl game. I just think it's kind of cheap when you can go as a 6-6 team and celebrate excellence. I don't think 500 is excellence, and I damn sure felt like that in the story that we've told before when I was at the University of Illinois, when we backed into a 6-6 record because Northwestern basically quit on the field in 2014, and we were left to go to the Heart of Dallas Bowl. It was not a good experience, and it kept the kids over the holiday in a hotel, and it didn't have that same feeling that it did back in 1979 when I went to a really fun bowl trip to Jacksonville, Florida, and saw North Carolina beat Michigan.
Mike, you bring up some really, really valid points, some great points when you make the argument against my argument that the player is committed. But once you've committed as a player, I think you should fulfill your commitment. I don't think it's an issue with the player and what the system is right now. We have a flawed system right now. Mm-hmm. You realize now we have 82 spots for bowl games. We had the NCAA rule less than 2 weeks ago that James Madison and Jacksonville State could not play in bowl games because they had not fulfilled the 2-year residence in their FCS conferences. Do you agree with that? Well, guess what? They are now both in bowl games because there were not enough teams with winning records to fill all 82 spots at this point in time. So at this point now, we are now down to 1 spot that will have a team play in a bowl game that has a losing record. Do I think that's the right thing? Do I think that's the way college football should be? The answer is no. But do we, and I'm going to ask you this question, put your administrator's hat on, as we go and move to a 12-team playoff, do we eliminate bowl games completely, and say that's the extent of postseason play. Just like FCS is at this point in time. There's 16 teams, right, in FCS playoffs. After that, everybody else is done. So is that the thing that we're looking? Is that our next move at this point in time?
I don't think the bowls are going to go anywhere because they're cheap television programming for ESPN, and ESPN owns darn near all of them. So it's and there are a lot of people who watch these games, not because they give a rat's butt about the game, but because they bet on it. You know, people will bet on football, and more people will watch football than they will watch any other sport. So that's one of the reasons why people have been trying to put together spring leagues between the week after the Super Bowl and before the Hall of Fame game in Canton, because there's like nothing going on, and a lot of people just watch football. That's the thing. So the bowl games aren't going to go anywhere. I've heard people throw out the idea of just going ahead and allowing teams to schedule a 13th game. And that way everybody gets something, which I think is a horrendous idea.
No.
These kids deserve to have some point to where they don't have to go to practice, don't have to go to meetings. You, of all people, know how much time and energy goes into one of those bowl trips. I know from being an administrator in the Mid-American Conference that we lost money going to bowl games because people see these payouts and see $750,000 and that, you know, for a low-level bowl game. And the schools never see that money. That is money laundering between conferences and ESPN. You get the money for the tickets that you sell, and you have a lot of mandated hotel nights, meal nights, travel costs, people you got to take that had nothing to do with the football team during the year, but want to, you know, ride that bandwagon into the bowl game and get their ring, their pendant, their gear. Man, it's an expensive proposition, and a lot of people are getting rich, and that's where I go back to. It's really hard for me to sit back and to see us make these kids play another game. I have no problem if they want to play, and I think this, and this is where I agree with you. I want to stop that thought for a second. I agree with your point that they should play, and that while they may not choose to do that right now, that's the decision that they're going to regret in 5 years, 10 years, 15 and 20, because this is the only sport, this love of ours, football, that you never play again after you have your last high school game. If you're lucky and you're one of the 4% that go on to play in college, you never get a chance to do that again. And it hurt the first 2 years that I didn't play. I didn't want to watch the game. I didn't want to be around the game. Unfortunately, I had to because it was my job. But I really put more emphasis into the other parts of my broadcasting other than football because it hurt too much to not be able to play that again. So I think in the end, the kids usually play unless they're one of those elite folks. But wow, it's tough, man. It's a tough situation.
It is tough, Mike. This is an argument that we could probably have for the next 3 hours. And I don't mean an argument. It's a discussion. That's a better word because there are pros and cons on each side. I mean, I totally understand, and I'm going to use Drake May and I'm going to use Ced Gray, for example. You know, I could understand why they would not play, and I can understand why they would play, and why I would expect them to play. And I mean, it's a difficult situation for both coaches, players, administrators, and everybody. And I make this statement a lot. You know, when you get up in the morning and you squeeze the toothpaste out and way too much comes out on your toothbrush, you can't put it back in the tube, can you? So we've squeezed way much toothpaste out of the tube in college football right now, and we're fighting to put it back in there. How we do it, I have no idea. There are administrators all over the place, Mike, that can't make any decisions on what's right for college football at this point.
They can't make decisions for anything. And I've said this before, and it gets me a little bit of email traffic from some of my old colleagues. But the biggest nothing burger in all of college athletics are the school presidents who are looking to DC to solve their problems. I got to tell you, it's not the coaches, it's not the ADs, it's not the conference commissioners. These presidents are brutal. That's the coach, Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell. When we come back, it'll be the fourth quarter as we close out the final regular season edition of Wild Dogs and Hogs. We'll talk a little Mountaineers. We'll talk a little Gardner-Webb. We'll talk a little Lenoir-Rhyne as they're still active in the Elite Eight of the D2 playoffs. That's coming up next right here on the North Carolina Sports Network.
Hey folks, David Glenn right here in Raleigh. One of my favorite restaurants for many years has been The Oak, Scratch Kitchen and Bourbon Bar. It's located on Lake Boone Trail, which happens to be a perfect location for a great meal and beverage if you're on your way to nearby Carter Finley Stadium or perhaps PNC Arena for a concert, Wolfpack or Hurricanes game, or other event. The menu is incredibly tasty and creative. The atmosphere is a lot of fun. The bourbon options are as high-end and varied as you'll find anywhere. The staff is super classy and first-rate, and I've just always loved the people, the food, and the overall vibe there. When I took Carolina Hurricanes owner Tom Dundon to lunch, yes, meaning the billionaire who owns the hockey team, I took him to The Oak. Seriously, it's that good. Learn more or make a reservation by visiting their website, theoakraleigh.com. That's theoakraleigh.com. Special thanks to Nick and Haley and their team for joining the family here at the David Glenn Show and the new North Carolina Sports Network.
It's the fourth quarter of Wild Dogs and Hogs here on the North Carolina Sports Network. I'm Mike Waddell along with the coach, Jim Collins. And let's talk some playoff football, Jim. Lenoir-Rhyne, the Bears are 12-1, got the big win over number 4 ranked Benedict on the road this past weekend down in Columbia, South Carolina, 35-25, the first ever road playoff victory for the Bears. And now they will go to number 14, Valdosta State. That's one of the historical great Division II programs of all time. And what would you imagine that playoff football fever is like around the Bears football program right now? I think for the first time to be this deep on the road going. A few years ago, they made it with Mike Houston all the way to the national championship game, but they were so good they didn't have to leave Hickory and the friendly confines of College Field. Now they have to go on the road. And I don't know, Jimmy, I think sometimes road games are more exciting than playing at home. What do you think?
Well, obviously, it becomes an issue with this time of year, just like a lot of teams experienced this past weekend with the weekend before with the Thanksgiving weekend, that their students were not on campus. So to host a home game without your student population there, et cetera. So sometimes a road game is good, I'll not disagree with you, but I would always rather play at home. And obviously my history goes back against the Lenoir-Rhyne Bears to NAIA football at the Elon Fighting Christians and the program they had there. And there's some national championships in that history at Lenoir-Rhyne.
For sure. My mother was a clarinetist in the marching band at Lenoir-Rhyne when they won that 1960 or 59 national championship with the main man, Eddie Hopp, big running back, and Fast Joe Ryan running for the Lenoir-Rhyne Bears right there out of Hickory. Ought to be fun. They'll play at Valdosta coming up on Saturday. Also, in a little postseason action, it's a conference championship game for Sean Clark and the Appalachian State Mountaineers. Big win, 55-27. The defense scoring again and again and again. And Joey Aguilar, again, having a big game in the pocket for head coach Sean Clark. And Black Saturday never shone so bright. They retired Armani Edwards' jersey, number 14. Coach Jerry Moore was out there in his Bum Phillips rawhide jacket. It's a good time to be a Mountaineer, but it wasn't a few weeks ago when that Fire Clark crowd was chirping up. I guess those people have been silenced right now as the Mountaineers are back playing for a Sun Belt championship.
Well, it's interesting, Mike. We spoke about the Mountaineers' opportunities mid-season and even early season after they lost a double overtime game to the University of North Carolina. And we made this statement, and the statement was that the latter part of the App season would be critical to where they finished in their conference and whether they would make the conference championship game. And I go back to a tried and true statement once again. they excelled in November, and they played great in November on a winning streak that's taken them to the conference championship game. And I applaud what they've done on the mountain, and best of luck to them in a conference championship game.
Troy's a big favorite in this one. The Trojans, the champions of the West, Appalachian State, the Sun Belt East champions. That's a 4:00 start coming up Saturday on ESPN. If you're Sean Clark and you go into this game, you've obviously coached a brilliant back part of the season, but how do you keep your guys grounded and focused on not being satisfied with just making the championship game and making a bowl game, but coming back with that big ring?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer, because it's I can't imagine a player not being as pumped and as psyched as you can possibly be with the opportunity to play for a championship. I mean, that's what you work all year for. Everybody says, well, you've got 10 games, you got 11 games, you got 12 games, you got whatever the number. Well, you work all year to get to this opportunity, and they busted their butts, and they've worked, and they've overcome some situations, and they've made it to that opportunity. Let's take advantage of that opportunity, and let's go get that ring, and let's win a championship, and let's set ourselves up for a great bowl game. We've already talked about bowl games at this point in time, but I would have a hard time understanding how you could not be ready to play in a conference championship game.
We're going to come back in a few weeks and have a bowl preview show, and then maybe even a bowl review show, because I like hanging out with you, and I think you like hanging out with me. But I got to ask you, give me your best conference championship game story, or even if you want to give us your best bowl game story.
Well, it's interesting. Mike, I have a history. When these conference championship games started was actually in 1992, and I'm dating myself right now. I actually coached in the very first SEC championship game in Birmingham, Alabama, against the University of Alabama. We were a 3-loss Florida team against an Alabama team that had a chance to go on and win the national championship, and we lost on the last-second interception in that game. So that's a great story. And then probably the best story I have of a bowl game is that in 1996 we lost to Florida State in the last regular season game when I was at Florida, and then went on to play them in the Sugar Bowl and beat them for the national championship. So those were two great experiences with a playoff game and a bowl game.
I loved the FedEx Orange Bowl whenever I was at Cincinnati. It was our first year of back-to-back Big East championships. Brian Kelly and our offense was humming like nothing I'd ever been a part of. But we went down to Miami. We got to stay in the Fountain Blue, and we had a 21 motorcycle motorcade escort.
They are the best.
We went anywhere.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you, man, I could have cared less about the game. I just wanted to go somewhere with that motorcade going.
Everywhere you go, from practice to practice, from practice to the events at night, you got a motorcycle escort. And I'm blessed. I'm blessed that I had the opportunity to coach in 5 Sugar Bowls and 2 Orange Bowls, a Fiesta Bowl, as well as some other bowls. So I've had great opportunities in bowl games.
I'll give you this one championship game. I've only been in one conference championship game, and that was my first day as the interim director of athletics at the University of Akron, December 1st in 2005. We had won the MAC East, and we were playing against Northern Illinois. So the fun thing about this is the commissioner of the MAC at the time was a former associate commissioner in the ACC who I knew very well, Rick Christ, Big Red. He was a lot of fun to be around, always, a big smile on his face, very gregarious guy. And the director of athletics at Northern Illinois at the time is a good friend of mine too. His name is Jim Phillips. He is also known as the commissioner of the Atlantic Coast Conference. Yeah. So we had played Northern Illinois 2 years earlier, and they had beaten us so bad in DeKalb on Illinois Beef Day that they had the dog running around, and it just got annoying because they beat us by like 50 points. But then we had beaten Northern Illinois the next year, so now we're playing them in a third consecutive year, but now for the championship, and they are blowing us out. And in the last quarter, we put on a great comeback. But right before that comeback started, old Rick Chris comes over to me, and I'm standing next to Jim in the end zone because Jim and I both like to stand in the end zone and watch from field level. And we're both sitting there, and Rick comes and puts his hand on my back, pats me, and says, "Hey, Mike, your guys have had a great season, but, you know, Northern Illinois is the best team, and they're going to go forward and represent the MAC in the bowl game, and that's best for the league." Now, you'd think that because we were also in the championship game that we would have a bowl waiting for us, but that wasn't true at the time. The MAC only had 2 bowl spots. Right. Miami, Ohio had already accepted one earlier in the week. So now it was win or go home in the conference championship game at Ford Field. He pats me on the back, and I think I said something to him that I will not repeat here on the air, but I said, you know, there's still 4 minutes in this game. We're going to come back and win. And damn if we didn't do it. With Mike Tirico and Kirk Herbstreit on the call, Luke Getzey, now an NFL quarterback coach, was our big guy in the pocket. Yeah. He floats one out to Dominic Hickson, like 40-some yards, touchdown zips, and we had to come back about exactly 25 days later to Ford Field and play in the Ford Motor City Bowl against Tommy West and the Memphis Tigers, and they got us in that one. But that was a great game. I love conference championship games. I love postseason basketball tournaments when we get to March. I just love that opportunity to play your way into a better situation. And what an experience it's been for both of us. We're truly blessed.
No doubt, Mike. I've had a wonderful, wonderful career with lots and lots of opportunities, and to experience many, many different challenges and many opportunities for success. And there's been some failures along the way too. Now, I remember a Fiesta Bowl that the University of Nebraska in the national championship game. Probably my number one least favorite memory in my career is that game in the Fiesta Bowl. But anyway, lots and lots of great opportunities.
Coach, it's been a lot of fun through the first 13 weeks of the season. We'll see you back for our big bowl preview show. Thanks a lot for being with us again this week on Wild Dogs and Hogs.
Thanks, Mike. I've enjoyed every single week. It's been a great time. Thank you.
I'm going to redo that close because that was stupid. Why am I thanking you for being on a show you're on every week? Another way to put it. That's Coach Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell. And, Coach, you want to come back and do a bowl preview show in a couple of weeks?
Hey, Mike, I'll do as many shows as you want to do. I love our time together, and I love talking college football. So let's go for as many as we can get. Let's do a bowl show and one after the bowls as far as I'm concerned.
How about a prediction? Louisville or Florida State this week in Charlotte in the ACC championship game?
I'm going with Louisville.
Little Jeff Brom action right there. I'm going to stay with the Noles. I'm hoping that the Noles can rise up, and maybe we'll see one of those great stories from the quarterback who comes in and lifts the Seminoles to victory. I'm going to be rooting for them, but I know it's hard for you to root for those Seminoles too much with all that Gator blood in your veins.
There's no doubt about that now. That's a tough one, but I just think Louisville has the better opportunity at this point with Travis being out. So I've got to go with the Cardinal.
That's Coach Jim Collins. I'm Mike Waddell, and you've been tuned in to Wild Dogs and Hogs here on the North Carolina Sports Network.